Wayne Dyer's transition pictures. I think his beginnings were very humble, if not slightly tragic. He was in an orphanage for the first 10 years of his life in Detroit. And eventually he became a teacher. He taught self-actualization to people. He actually taught about how to not follow Jesus or follow any kind of theory, but to actually just be Jesus-like in your life. Be Buddha-like. Don't necessarily slip into the meta-narrative, the tribal script of a particular religion. You don't need it. You just need to be Christ-like, which is taking the path of higher intention. And eventually what happened was people used to turn up to these lectures at St. John's University in New York that he was giving, and they were very, very popular. So one day he drove to Fort Lauderdale, booked himself in a motel for 2 weeks, and spent every night writing a book that put in all the stuff he'd learned from his courses and all the stuff that people had wanted to hear. And it was called Your Erroneous Zones. This was in the 1970s. From there he appeared on TV and so on. But Your Erroneous Zones sold 100 million copies. And he wrote like 30 odd books on top of that as well. He died in 2015 at the age of 75 of a heart attack, actually, having been diagnosed with leukemia in 2009. He was given remote healing from Brazil. He refused to go, I think. And when they said, well, for the remote healing, you need to stay in bed for 24 hours and rest, I don't think he would do that either. I think he went out on the beach for a walk instead. And I hear he collapsed on the beach during the remote healing because the healing was so powerful. So I did his pictures for his transition. When I found him, he was a glove puppet on the end of an arm, right? Which I thought was incredibly strange. And this glove puppet was a very tight fit on this arm. And when he managed to squeeze himself off, it was with a feeling of, oh, finally, I am free of that. Now, I thought maybe he wasn't quite the guy we thought he was. Maybe he'd had to pretend to a certain extent to be Wayne Dyer, the personality. And the Wayne Dyer that his family knew, that his friends knew, was not quite like he presented himself in public. And so this was a relief that he could finally be himself. That was possible. It could also be just shaking off the illness, that he'd been ill since 2009 and he didn't have to be that way anymore. He was free. But in any case, he stretched. It was like, oh, this is amazing. And unlike all the other people I've done so far, I don't know how many there are, but a couple of dozen now. Unlike all of those, he was not fazed by this process at all. In fact, he sat down and just looked at what is in fact a metaphorical tunnel and space and so on, but just relaxed into it and said, wow, let me just take this in. Let me look at what this is. This is okay. Wow, I am fine with this. And I think he might have been expecting a meet and greet of some kind. But of course there's nothing there initially. He gets up and of course there is the tunnel that I always see, the metaphorical tunnel. And he starts walking along this tunnel. And there's a bit of a climb to it. About a third of the way up, he slowed down to a stop. He just was not strong enough to make it up to the top for some reason. You know, grace, I always talk about grace, that current that is everywhere all the time, but greets us very often in the transition period. It came down the rest of the slope and gathered him up, but not in a sort of, oh, let's just help you to the top kind of way, although there was an element of that. This was more about, hey buddy, are we glad to see you? Come on home, we got things to show you. It reminded me so much of that thing I said way back. Don't get caught up in regrets or wishing you'd lived longer or whatever. Just sing your death song and die like a hero going home. Remember I said that? This is what this was like, and I found it so moving. He was dying like a hero going home, and that's how he was welcomed by grace, which lifted him to the top of the tunnel, the passageway, set him down, and I guess he relaxed into the process at this point because he stood there and wanted to savor where he was. There was no resistance. There was no superior will of his mortal self trying to impose rules on this. And yet, as he stood there, he was overcome with emotion. Maybe he felt joy at the idea of returning to source. And when he made the final trek up this last bit of tunnel, he just leaned against the wall, taking it all in. Not for a second was he reluctant. Not for a second did he doubt the process or stand in the way of the current and the flow. He simply wanted to absorb every second of what was going on. Every feature, every detail. This was the culmination of his investigations, his inquiring mind, his teachings. This was the moment. And when the time came, and this was really interesting, when the time came, he stepped into the light. But as he did so, the light became incredibly, blindingly bright. So much so that for the very first time I thought that I was like piggybacking on his entry, his ascension. Because I could feel this light. I could feel him sinking into it. And all it did was confirm what I've seen a couple of times before, that we go into whiteness. A far higher vibrational state than we have ever been in. So high that there's nothing to see, nothing to feel, nothing to learn, nothing to say. You just become one with everything. The individual consciousness merges into universal consciousness. And you become whole with everything. That's what it felt like. And I couldn't go any further, but I felt this purity, the womb-like warmth of being a part of everything. And as he slipped away and I came back, I thought, wow, he's in good hands. And he was welcomed like a hero going home. He had served his soul's purpose. He had fulfilled his soul's path and followed it to its natural conclusion. This was a guy who walked the talk. He didn't die with his music in him. That's for sure. I found it incredibly moving. I was sitting in a cafe crying because I was pleased for him. This was perfect. Wayne Dyer. One of the most delightful, joyful experiences I've had while I've been doing this channeling work. And I couldn't be more pleased. Alrighty, I gotta go. Thank you very much indeed for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope the drilling and the hammering didn't disturb you too much. But I will see you very soon. Thanks very much indeed. Bye-bye.